This is a polling place in Mississippi where voting is a sacred trust. This is one of the citizens who can vote. He is John P. Crosswhite, age 70. He lives on a World War I pension, had no formal schooling, taught himself to read and write. He is a qualified voter. The first man he ever voted for was, as he puts it, that fellow Wilson, and he has been voting ever since. This is David Robertson, age 27. He teaches science at Rowan, a segregated Negro high school in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. A graduate of Alcorn A&M College, a veteran of the Korean War, he has, since last spring, been working towards his master's degree in biology at Cornell University under a fellowship provided by the National Science Foundation.
When the gene was first discovered, it was believed that it was the last thing that could be learned about the transmission of those things that we inherit. But Watson and Crick later learned by a method of X-ray diffraction that the gene is made up of a material known as DNA, which is also deoxyribonucleic acid.
David Robertson has tried a number of times to register to vote in Mississippi. Each time, he has been told that he is not qualified because he failed to pass Mississippi's literacy test. Technically then, David Robertson, science teacher, college graduate, master's degree candidate, and a fellow of the National Science Foundation, is illiterate. Theron C. Lind, circuit clerk and voting registrar of Forest County, Mississippi, is one of the most powerful men in America. He and the 81 other county registrars in Mississippi, as well as registrars in Louisiana and other southern states, have the power under state law to decide who can and who cannot vote. It was Theron Lind who ruled that David Robertson was not qualified to vote.
This is Radio Hattiesburg, WFOR, Mississippi's first radio station, now in its 39th year of quality broadcasting leadership.
Constable Lee Daniels is proud to be a part of tonight's election returns from Radio Hattiesburg News Central. And in making possible this broadcast, Constable Lee Daniels hopes that you, the citizens of Hattiesburg and South Mississippi, will be constantly reminded of your obligation, duty, and basic right to vote. The vote in Hattiesburg and South Mississippi guarantees better government for our section of the country.
CBS reports Mississippi on the 15th Amendment is brought to you by Maxwell House Coffee. Good to the last drop. Another fine product of General Foods. CBS reports Mississippi and the 15th Amendment. Now, here is CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent David Schoenbrunn.
Good evening. This is the Constitution of the United States of America here in the National Archives in Washington. And this is the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, which says, Section 1, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Section 2, the Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. This 15th Amendment was passed by an overwhelming majority in the Senate and the House in 1869, then signed by President Grant and ratified by 31 of the 37 states and eventually by all the states.
The United States Constitution provides for freedom to vote, and this country must permit every man and woman to exercise their franchise, to shoot, as we saw in the case of Mississippi, two young people who were involved in an effort to register people, to burn churches as a reprisal. With all of the provisions of the United States Constitution, at least the basic provision of the Constitution guaranteeing freedom of worship, the right to vote is very basic. If we're going to neglect that right, then all of our talk about freedom is hollow, and therefore we shall give every protection that we can to anybody seeking to vote. I hope everybody will register in this country, and I hope they will vote. And if it requires extra legislation and extra force, we shall do that.
This is Hattiesburg, Mississippi, county seat of Forrest County. It didn't exist until 11 years after the 15th Amendment, but it is perhaps typical of the problem President Kennedy defined. Of the 7,500 Negroes of voting age in Forrest County, only 12 of them were adjudged eligible to vote in the 1960 presidential election. If these 12 voted, they represented 0.2% of the adult Negroes in the county. Hattiesburg is the traditional Mississippi town, drenched in magnolia and sweltering summer temperatures. Passenger trains make 4 stops a day. Life and death are totally segregated. Schools, churches, buses, even the cemeteries and the obituary page. This is the home of Mattie Bivens, a college junior, age 22, who lives at 306 Willis Avenue. This is the county courthouse, a mile away. Here, local residents registered to vote. For most Americans, registering is a routine act. But as you watch Mattie Bivens travel the mile between her home and this courthouse, you will be watching a young American citizen in the supreme test of her life. If some of the film is not first quality, it is because there are places in Mississippi where a camera is not welcome.
I was born in the house where I'm living now. I had planned to go down to register the day before. I was thinking as I walked along the dirt road in front of my house about the dust which would be on my shoes and the scars from the rocks, and that if we had enough registered voters, Negro registered voters that is, this wouldn't be a problem at all, because the streets would be paved rather than dirt streets. It was a very hot day. The bus that I got on that morning had many advertisements on the outside. All of these places were places where no Negroes were allowed, white only. I got on the bus, paid my fare, and walked to the back of the bus. The bus ride from the bus stop to the downtown area was about 12 or 15 minutes long. I got off the bus, crossed the street, and went down to the courthouse. As I started up the steps to the courthouse, I was a little afraid. The registrar, Mr. Lynn, was on his way out. I'm small, and he's an extra large man. And he said to me that the lady inside will take care of you. My conversation with the lady in the office was strictly businesslike. I told her my purpose for being there, and she gave me the application to fill out. Along with the application, she gave me a section of the Constitution typed on 2 index cards. She told me that once I began filling out the application, she could not answer any questions concerning it. Once I began filling out the form, I wasn't afraid anymore. I felt more self-confident. I was in the office 20 or 30 minutes because the section of the Constitution which I was given was so long.
The Mississippi Constitution dates from 1890, the oldest state constitution still in effect. The state-published book that contains the Constitution is 242 pages long. The Constitution itself contains 285 sections, many of them long and involved. Mattie Bivens was given to copy and to interpret Section 89. This is the way it reads. There shall be appointed in each house of the legislature a standing committee on local and private legislation, the House committee to consist of 7 representatives and the Senate committee of 5 senators. No local or private bill shall be passed by either house until it shall have been referred to said committee thereof, and shall have been reported back with a recommendation in writing that it do pass, stating affirmatively the reasons therefore, and why the end to be accomplished should not be reached by a general law or by a proceeding in court. Or, if the recommendation of the committee be that the bill do not pass, then it shall not pass the House to which it is so reported, unless it be voted for by a majority of all members elected thereto. If a bill is passed in conformity to the requirements hereof, other than such as are prohibited in the next section, the courts shall not, because of its local, special, or private nature, refuse to enforce it. It is impossible to know exactly what Mattie Bivens wrote on her official form in those 20 or 30 minutes in the registrar's office. But afterwards, we asked her to look at the bound copy of the Mississippi Constitution and interpret Section 89 as she understood it.
This section of the Constitution deals with local, special, and private bills rather than general laws, and how these laws or bills may be passed or rejected by the legislature. In each house, there is a permanent committee. The 7 representatives serve to make up the House committee, and 5 senators serve to make up the Senate committee. No local or private bill shall be passed by either house until it shall have been referred to said committee thereof. This simply means that a bill cannot be passed in the House unless it has been referred to the committee of this House. And the same goes for a bill being passed in the Senate. It cannot be passed unless it has gone before the Senate committee.
We asked several legal authorities at one of America's great law schools how Mattie Bivens did. It was their opinion that she interpreted well the meaning of Section 89. 4 weeks later, Mattie Bivens went back to find out if she had passed the literacy test. Registrar Theron Lynn told her he had no news for her and to come back at a later date. When she went back 2 days ago, she was told she was not qualified to vote. Mattie Bivens' sister-in-law, Gloria Bivens, is a college graduate, a school teacher. She also has attempted to register in Hattiesburg.
Well, I went up on the 21st of June, and I filled out an application, and Mr. Lynn didn't look at it, so he just told me that to look for it in the paper, and I asked him to look for what in the paper. He said that my name would appear in it, that I had applied an application, put in for an application, that's all. And I noticed that I kept asking him questions. I thought maybe he'd get up so he could look at it, and I asked him, was there anything that he could do to tell me whether or not I passed it today? He told me no, that it's they had changed it in the last section of legislation that they had lately, and he couldn't tell within 30 days, and he didn't move from his desk.
Why do you want to vote?
Well, I feel that a good citizen should vote, and maybe we could get more, and I'm sure that we could get more from our money that we pay for taxes, like better roads and possibly street lighting in our neighborhood. And good, too, perhaps our police protection would be different. Maybe we could get some colored police down here and, things like that.
When Gloria Bivens went back later, Theron Lynn told her she was not qualified to vote. There was a time when literacy tests in Mississippi and elsewhere included such questions as, how many bubbles in a bar of soap? But recently, the examination has become much more sophisticated. The Civil Rights Commission, consisting of prominent Republicans and Democrats, Northerners and Southerners, appointed by President Eisenhower and continued by President Kennedy with the approval of the Congress, has investigated the methods of grading these tests. Chairman of the commission, Dr. John A. Hanna, who is also president of Michigan State University, speaking generally about literacy tests in Mississippi, had this to say.
Negro that applies for registration is required to fill out a form. And this has to be filled out accurately. And in this form, he indicates whether or not he can handle the English language. If there are any errors in it, any errors in spelling, any uncrossed T's or undotted I's, that alone may be sufficient to make it possible for the registrar to reject it. Then the registrar is required by Mississippi law to ask the prospective registrant to interpret one or more sections of the Mississippi Constitution. I think there are 285 sections to the Mississippi Constitution. And the registrar is the sole determiner as to whether or not this interpretation is adequate. The law in Mississippi prevents the registrar from indicating to the unsuccessful registrant the reason for the failure. So that if the applicant fails, all the information he gets is that he fails. And the facts are, of course, that very well qualified persons, school teachers, doctors, lawyers, men and women with doctor's degrees from respectable American universities, that are good citizens, would be regarded good citizens elsewhere, fail and are not permitted to register. Then beyond this, it takes a good deal of courage in Mississippi to get yourself ready to apply in the first place. Because the general tenor in many sections of the state is to enforce economic reprisals. People lose their jobs. They happen to operate a store, they lose their business. All sorts of gimmicks are resorted to affect their economic security. And then in some cases, of course, there is a fear of physical violence. There isn't any question, but in recent months and weeks and days, persons that have been active in trying to get qualified Negroes to register or in the desire to register themselves have met with physical violence.
The tests go on. David Robertson, as we said earlier, was qualified by the National Science Foundation for a fellowship at Cornell University. He was good enough to be a meteorologist for the Army in Korea. He is qualified by the state of Mississippi to teach high school biology in Hattiesburg. Yet he has, on 5 different occasions, failed his literacy test.
To look at the overall picture at the school where I worked, which is Rowan High School, and we have some 27 teachers there, that of the 27, some 10 or 11 of them hold master's degrees, and most of them hold their master's degrees from Eastern or Midwestern universities, and that out of this number, we have about 5 or 6 of them voting, which is a very, very small percentage. The civics and government is taught at Rowan High School, and also you have voteless people who are teaching these courses. So this question we asked ourselves, how can we be qualified to teach, but yet we are not qualified to vote?
David Robertson has failed the literacy test 5 times. He does not know why. And as Dr. Hanner explained, Mississippi state law prohibits Theron Lind or any registrar from making such an explanation. Most white people in Mississippi support this policy, including W. Dudley Connor, one of Hattiesburg's leading attorneys.
In this case that the Justice Department filed against Mr. Lind, there were a number of Negroes who had master's degrees from colleges, who were teaching in the Hattiesburg public school system, who had attempted on numerous occasions to register and were told by Mr. Lind that they were not qualified. Do you think it's possible for a man with a master's degree who is teaching in your own public schools here not to be qualified to vote?
You have made a statement of fact, which is an assumption of fact. I don't know that that is a true statement of fact. I have all the confidence in the world in integrity and decency and good citizenship up there in Lynn. And these charges that are made against him, I personally do not believe.
I've checked, and I've found that at Rowan High School, the Negro high school here in Hattiesburg, there are some 28 teachers. Of those 28, there are some 10 or 11 who have master's degrees or higher degrees, most of them from northern and midwestern universities. Yet of all of these teachers at Rowan High School, there are only 4 currently who are registered, even though many more than that have tried to register. How would you account for that?
Well, you are making a statement of fact that I don't know is true, and I don't affirm it. But assuming that it is true, then I would like to point out that there are many factors that go into making up what is a qualified elector other than simple education, simple degree from some university. Among those factors are, I believe, under our Constitution, that a man must have never been convicted of bribery, theft, arson, obtaining money or goods under false pretense, perjury, forgery, embezzlement, or bigamy. He must have paid his poll taxes that were required of him. And he must be of good moral character.
Wouldn't you assume that one must have all of those things to be a qualified teacher of young Negro students in a high school as well?
Well, you know, Jesus Christ selected 12 disciples and got a rotten apple out of 12. How could you expect a school board to select 28 free from being rotten?
Since I've been in Hattiesburg, I have heard white people say that the literacy tests and all of these other qualifications for registration are merely means to keep Negroes from voting, and that personally they did not want any Negroes to vote.
I don't want the Negro as I have known him and contacted him during my lifetime as a class to control the making of the law that controls me, to control the government under which I live.
Would you feel better then if there were some perfectly legal means of keeping all Negroes off the rolls?
I'd feel better, and I think this country would be better off if all Negroes were removed from it, because I think it is a potential source of racial strife.
It is a mistake for the casual visitor in Mississippi to make generalizations, for even the most staunch segregationist may have completely different views on suffrage. Former mayor and former head of the Forrest County White Citizens Council, Edward J. Curry, talked to reporter William Peters about the right to vote.
I have seen some of our Negro citizens that I was real proud of because of their educational attainments, their attainments in every field. And I think those of that kind that I know myself should be permitted to qualify for voting and should be permitted to vote.
Do you think there's a fear on the part of many white people in Mississippi of Negroes voting in large groups?
No, sir, I wouldn't describe it as being fear. They simply don't want them to vote. I think it's a carryover, in my best judgment, from the time of the Civil War, the war between the states. You remember we had a condition of slavery in America. We had masters and slaves, and a great many people through the generations don't realize that that status has ever been terminated. They still look upon the white man as being the master and the Negro the slave. And a great many of our people have never been able, and I don't think ever will, during their natural life, be able to overcome that impression that they got from the era when there was that status of master and slave.
The Reverend Wayne K. Pittman is pastor of the East Pine Circuit AME Church. Since 1954, he has tried repeatedly to register to vote in Hattiesburg, where he has lived all his life.
Why do you want to vote?
Well, I believe that voting is a prerequisite to first-class citizenship. And then it has a lot to do with the consciousness of a person being an American in its entirety. And then I believe that if I become a qualified voter along with other Negroes here in Mississippi, that we will be able to speak and get certain things that we feel that we are entitled to. But a voteless person is a hopeless person. We have nothing to do with their entering office. We have nothing to do with their tenure of office. They feel and know that they're not obligated to us. And then again, it makes you feel that what the civil government represents for all of its people will include you too. But if we are taught one thing in our classrooms and then experience different things on our streets, we wonder who is right and who's wrong. It's confusing.